Chapter 3. Motivation, the engine of your child's growth. Want to learn the key to teaching your child new skills and facilitating learning? I thought you might. If joining is the right hand of the Sunrise program, motivation is the left hand. You need to join in order to get your child to a place where she is ready to learn and grow, and motivation is the lever you use to get the learning and growth to happen once she's ready. Before we dive into the motivation principle and how to utilize it, it's important that we talk about the problems and pitfalls of the conventional way that children on the autism spectrum are taught. The timing problem. The biggest mistake we make is attempting to teach or challenge our kids when they are not in a state where they can take in new information. When your child is, for instance, isming, not giving you eye contact, not responding when you speak to him or call his name, he is giving you a red light. We'll talk much more about red lights and green lights in Chapter 12. When you try to teach, cajole, or enlist your child while he is giving you a red light, you are running a red. When you're driving and you run a red light, you might think you'll get to your destination more quickly, but oftentimes the result is quite different. Maybe a fender bender, maybe sitting on the side of the road getting a ticket. Likewise, when you're with your child, you might run a red thinking you'll get where you want to go with him faster. However, the result here is also the opposite. It is crucial to wait until your child is ready and available before doing any teaching or challenging. We call these windows of availability green lights. Again, this will be reintroduced later. If your child is not isming and is looking at you and responsive, you probably have a green light. That is the time for teaching or asking for something from him. You'll get more of these windows of availability if you join consistently, by the way. When we challenge our children at the correct times, the speed of learning and quality of interaction is drastically accelerated. You really will not believe how much it will pay off to follow your child's learning schedule rather than yours or anyone else's. The motivation mismatch. Motivation is the engine of growth. It is the single largest factor in your child's learning and progress. When a child is following his or her own intrinsic interests and motivations, learning comes fast and furious. Fortunately, very few people will fight you on this idea. There is widespread agreement on the importance of each child's motivation. Unfortunately, the motivation principle is rarely, if ever, put into practice with any consistency, especially with children on the autism spectrum. 99% of the time, our children are taught in a way that works against the grain and slows down their learning. They are taught according to the schedule, curriculum, and dictates of the adults who are teaching them. At home, the adults usually decide what activities will occur, bath time, learning, eating, playtime, and how they will transpire, with what toys, food, silverware, games, books. In a school classroom, this system of adults choosing the what and the how is even more prevalent. Even the best, most dedicated, most talented teachers cannot possibly customize their teaching to every child's individual motivation when they face a room full of students, each of whom has sharply divergent interests. To add to the mismatch, children on the autism spectrum tend to have unusual and esoteric interests in the first place. What neurotypical children find motivating rarely interests children on the spectrum. Therefore, traditional modes of teaching will hardly ever be motivating to these children. The end result is that the manner in which our kids are taught is not matched to what they find motivating and interesting. A child is asked to sit down at a table and fill out a worksheet. But it turns out that she likes Star Wars themes and could be easily engaged in an activity involving Darth Vader or the Millennium Falcon. A child is told to say 2 new words in a certain order, for no reason that he can fathom. And yet, he might love to be chased, and he might be happy to say, "chase me," or "run fast" in the context of a chasing game. A little girl is asked to count to 5 by counting black circles on a piece of paper. but she loves dinosaurs. Wouldn't she learn to count faster if we played a game with dinosaurs where she had to count out 5 dinosaurs that she wanted? The books The Brain That Changes Itself and The Art of Changing the Brain point out that if you really want to change the brain, put the brain in a maximum growth state and foster the most learning, the key is to find and capitalize on the interests and motivations that a person already has, not to force feed someone information or to try to make someone motivated. When a child or adult is excited and motivated, neurotransmitters are secreted that act to turn on the brain, priming it for growth, change, and learning. You want to introduce every skill you want your child to learn, every educational goal you have, every new activity you want your child to try within games or activities that are built around what your child already finds motivating and interesting. Pitfalls of the reward principle. It is usually at this point that school teachers or therapists will say to me, "We're already using this technique. We have been for years. We find something that each child likes, say M&Ms or a favorite toy, and we use these things as rewards to get the children to do something that we are trying to help them to do or learn." To be clear, using rewards is the exact opposite of the motivation principle, but we'll get to that in a bit. For now, it is important to understand that the reward principle is the single most widely used teaching technique in the entire world when it comes to children with autism. I'm using the term reward principle here for clarity and simplicity. It is not an academic or technical term. I'm sure, without even meeting you, that your child has been worked with using the reward principle. And there is nothing remotely strange about this. Everybody loves the reward principle. Hey, it's awesome. It gets our kids to do stuff. Why wouldn't we love it? Without question, there are definitely a sizable number of our kids who will do something we want them to do when we offer them the right rewards. However, doing this comes with some pretty huge side effects. Detrimental desserts. Look, if you offer me chocolate, my first reaction is, "Chocolate me likey." And I'm not exaggerating when I say that I really like chocolate. I like things covered in chocolate, things with chocolate in them, things made out of chocolate. Did I mention chocolate? I tell you this to make a larger point and to plant the seeds now in case you're thinking of buying me a gift. If you stick a plate of broccoli in front of me, I'm not going to beat down any doors to get at it. Don't get me wrong, I have a healthy respect for broccoli, and I do eat it, but it's not my favorite thing in the world. Truth is, I eat it purely out of some twisted sense of biological obligation. Now, if you tell me that if I finish that plate of broccoli in front of me, you'll give me a bowl of double chocolate ice cream with hot fudge and chocolate-covered peanuts, then we're in business. I probably will finish the broccoli. But what happens when you don't have any chocolate to offer me? Did offering me that dessert magically transform me into a vegetable-loving health nut? Will I now scarf down any plate of broccoli that crosses my path? Heck no! Unless you cover every plate of broccoli from here to eternity in a pound of chocolate, good luck! But let's take a closer look at why this is, because it goes to the heart of how all human beings, including our kids, operate. When we set up the reward system, we are basically saying this. Listen, if you do this awful, terrible thing that you can't stand, I'll give you this wonderful reward. In fact, the only reason to do what I'm asking is for the reward. Interestingly, a growing body of research explained in books such as Drive, The Medici Effect, and The Upside of Irrationality shows that in business, offering people financial rewards as a monetary bonus ahead of time for doing a task that requires thought and learning actually causes a decrease in performance. Think about it. We are a nation of people that love fattening, sugar-laden treats. But most of us grew up with loving parents who coaxed or compelled us to eat our vegetables. What the heck happened? Well, we grew up with the reward principle, at least in the food category. We were told that if we ate our vegetables, we would get to eat our delicious dessert. Sure, we ate our veggies when we had to, but in most cases, we came to see the healthy stuff as the gross, obligatory food that we had to get through in order to get to the good stuff, which was the fatty, sugary poison we call dessert. In fact, the very idea of dessert conjures up notions of the good-tasting sweet reward following the meal. Why do we need the reward? Why isn't the meal enough? If we saw the meal as delicious and truly satisfying in its own right, it would be enough. This is the exact scenario that children on the spectrum are presented with, except they are presented with it for everything. Nothing is too big or small to warrant a reward, and the less our children seem to want to do something, the bigger the reward they get for doing it. The net result of this arrangement is that they grow to hate doing the very things we are endeavoring to get them to do on their own. Sure, they'll do it some of the time, but now they're doing it only for the reward. This is especially problematic for our special group of children because we are, in essence, telling them, let's get through this stinky human interaction crud, and then you can get the good stuff. But the thing is, we want the human interaction to be the good stuff. That's our children's only ticket out. If you are the parent of a neurotypical teenage girl, you don't have to offer her a reward to get her to talk on the phone with her friends. You may have to reward her to get her off the phone. Why? Because for her, talking on the phone with her friends, human interaction, socialization, and interpersonal relating is the reward. It is the good stuff. That's where we want our special kids to be. Robotic behavior. One of the most common complaints I hear from parents with respect to the reward principle is that yes, their children do perform some useful behaviors, but that they do so in a way usually described as robotic. Their children may put the puzzle together or ask, "How are you today?" or shake a person's hand when prompted, but they do so in a programmed manner without any apparent joy or spontaneity. In fact, many of these parents have been told that robotic behavior is a key symptom of autism, and indeed, many children on the spectrum do appear this way. However, in our experience, robotic behavior, devoid of joy and spontaneity, is not a symptom of autism. Rather, it is a symptom of the way we teach children with autism. It is a symptom of the widespread and excessive use of the reward principle. James, though he is still on the autism spectrum, does not have robotic behaviors. When my niece Jade was autistic, she did not have robotic behaviors. When I had autism, I did not exhibit robotic behaviors. At the Autism Treatment Center of America, we have worked with many children who did not display robotic behavior. Robotic behavior is not ubiquitous in Sunrise Program children. The motivation principle is not a magic cure-all, but one thing it does not do is produce robotic behaviors. Compliance-centric. I was once shown a video as an example of success in which a little boy was repeatedly told, "Coat on," and then given an M&M when he complied. As soon as he finished putting his coat on, a facilitator would take the coat off again, offer the little boy his coat again, and say, "Coat on" again. This method was seen as a success because by the end, the little boy was reliably putting on his coat when asked. I am not trying to paint every therapy with one brush, and I know that not all therapists do what I saw in the video. However, some version of this, the reward may change, the activity may be less repetitive, etc., is still the norm in autism treatment. I highlight this video for a very specific reason. As I watched it, what struck me, in addition to my concern about what this experience might have felt like for this boy, was that in reality, this boy had not learned the skill the facilitators were aiming for. At the end of the day, this little boy learned one thing: compliance. Now, I'm not saying that compliance is a bad thing, but it is very different than learning the actual skill that the therapists were claiming to teach. The actual skill of putting one's coat on, to use this very simple example, entails the following. I walk outside, I realize it's chilly out. I step back inside. I put on my coat. I go back outside. What the little boy in the video learned was to put his coat on when someone said, "coat on." As I said, this is by no means a bad thing for him to learn, but it means that someone has to follow him around and tell him to put his coat on, take it off, put his shoes on, take his shoes off, etc. To be independent and to feel successful and to interact socially in a meaningful way, this little boy has to learn the real skill. He needs to learn not only the real coat donning skill, but also, much more importantly, real social interaction skills. Being interested in others, communicating, enjoying an interactive game or activity, etc., rather than having someone next to him telling him what to do and say every minute. The ability of a child or adult to take something that he has learned and apply it in different circumstances, home, school, etc., is called generalization. For our children, being able to generalize what they learn is absolutely critical. Truly learning something and then being able to generalize it comes from enjoying it. It comes from being interested in it, and it comes from being internally motivated to do it. While repetitive teaching with rewards is not bad for getting a child to follow instructions, this method is utterly incapable of manufacturing motivation. It cannot enable that child to sincerely learn, generalize, enjoy, and be interested in what she is being taught. This is even more the case when it comes to social skills, which are the very abilities our children could most use help acquiring. In short, these are the three main side effects of the reward principle. 1. Robotic behavior. 2. Your child will learn to hate what he is being asked to do or learn. 3. Your child will not really learn the actual skill, only to follow instructions, and thus will have great difficulty generalizing the skill to other situations where there is not a prompt behavior reward system in place. James used to love games that involved us running. To be precise, he especially enjoyed watching me run. He would say, "Juan, run fast," his version of Ron, run fast, and then break out into peals of laughter when I did so. I'm not sure whether to take this as a compliment or an insult. I could get him to do almost anything if it involved me running. Charlotte once called me to tell me that in his sleep, James was giggling and saying, "Juan, run fast." He was apparently dreaming. Could you imagine this happening with the reward principle? Using the motivation principle. If the motivation principle is not the reward principle, how is it different? This is another one of those Sunrise Program techniques that isn't just different, it's the exact opposite. To use this technique, we must flip everything. A good place to start is to change your focus as you are trying to teach or challenge your child. First, the starting point is no longer identifying what you want your child to do. Instead, think about what your child's areas of interest, motivations, are. Does your child like Disney characters, airplanes, physical play, science fiction themes, chasing games? You're going to focus on these first, and then think about what you want your child to do or learn. You will want to write down some of your child's interests and motivations. You may be wondering how you know what these interests are. All you need to do is to observe your child. What does your child do? What does she gravitate toward? Is there anything that she really enjoys watching you do? If your child is verbal, what does she talk about when an adult isn't dictating the conversation? You will also want to write down a short list of some educational goals, or more simply, things that you want your child to do. Specificity is very important here. It is very difficult to effectively pursue a broad goal with your child. For example, you may be helping your child with verbal communication, but a goal of using words is too general. Rather, you'd want a goal such as using the word chase or saying, "I want chase," depending on your child's language level. Goals are by no means limited to language. They can involve eye contact, length of time he is willing to stay involved in a game, taking turns, a specific activity like going to the dentist, even self-care skills included in daily living, such as toilet training, taking a bath, eating a particular food that isn't his favorite, getting dressed, or cleaning his room. The technique. At the core, it only takes 3 steps to implement the motivation principle. 1. Join your child until she is no longer isming, and she looks at you, more than just a 1-second glance. Note, you can skip this step only if your child is already interacting with you and not isming at all. 2. Playfully invite your child to participate in an activity or game based upon something that she likes, as we've discussed. 3. Beginner's version. If and only if your child willingly gets involved in your game, keep that game going as long as possible. For example, if your child loves to be tickled or enjoys talking about the planets, simply participate in this activity with great enthusiasm for as long as your child stays interested. Just having your child engage in that game for increasing amounts of time will stretch her interactive attention span and thus her ability to interact with others. 3. Advanced option. If and only if your child willingly gets involved in your game, add one thing. For example, if your child loves chase games and you successfully get her to play chase with you, then try adding one thing such as you keep running out of gas and she has to keep saying chase to get you to chase her. The story of Pedro. Pedro's mother came to a startup program exasperated and a bit desperate. She had been trying to toilet train Pedro for 6 months. Not only was he not yet peeing in the toilet, but he had a greater aversion to anything toilet-related than he had 6 months prior. Pedro's mom brought this challenge up during one of the question and answer sessions of her startup course, but she was not feeling optimistic about finding a solution. We discussed the motivation principle, and we spent a few minutes coming up with an idea for her to use. First, we asked her what one of Pedro's motivations was. She hesitated, then said that her son loved stairs and anything, such as escalators or even stools, that had steps. She quickly added an apology, saying that she must not have chosen the right kind of motivation since steps and stairs had nothing to do with peeing in the toilet. We told her that this was exactly the right kind of motivation, as any of her son's interests would be. Sure, it was true that stairs and steps did not have anything intrinsically in common with using the toilet, but that was fine, as the whole principle is predicated on combining 2 things, a motivation and a goal, that don't necessarily relate together into one game or activity. So, we helped her to come up with a game, and she returned home after the startup, eager to try it with her son. Her first day back, she entered Pedro's room with a new 3-step stool. Pedro walked over to it and climbed onto it, immediately interested. That first day, all Pedro's mom did was to play with him on this stool in whatever way he liked. The second day, she brought the stepping stool in again and invited Pedro to play on it once more. This time, however, the game involved her moving the stool to different locations around the room, and Pedro climbed on it only after his mom moved it to the next destination. On the third day, they were playing this game again, and at the height of Pedro's excitement and involvement, she pushed the stepping stool right up against the toilet and invited Pedro to walk up the 3 steps, stand on the stool, and pee into the toilet. Pedro did it, and he did it happily and without a fight. Now let's take a few minutes to uncover exactly why this worked. It would be reasonable for you to ask how it's possible that Pedro, a little boy who seemed unable to pee in the potty after 6 months of his mother trying, peed in the toilet for the first time in less than 3 days. Furthermore, Pedro did not require rewards to continue to use the toilet. Over the next few days, his mom soon removed the stool, and Pedro was fine with using the toilet without it. In fact, I used to be concerned that, when telling this story, the jump from 6 months to 3 days might seem too good to be true. But there's nothing mysterious about it. It's logic, not magic, that makes it work. The motivation principle plays to your child's intelligence. It plays on the fact that your child has the intelligence to do many of the things that he isn't doing. Autism is not an intelligence problem. Our job is not to make our children more intelligent. It is to unlock the intelligence that's already there. Knowing this, we can say that Pedro's lack of toileting was not an intelligence problem. It was a motivation issue. Pedro did not lack the smarts to use the toilet. He lacked an interest, a trust, and a motivation. And in hindsight, this should not be at all surprising. First of all, he's getting his diaper changed every so often throughout the day. So from his point of view, life is good. It's like living at a full-service gas station. He pees, he poops, and poof! Someone swoops in, takes the smelly diaper away, cleans him up, and provides him with a fresh new diaper. Sounds good to me. Do any of us really think that Pedro is lying in his bed at night thinking, this diaper situation is pretty cool, but it would be so much more socially appropriate for me to go directly into the toilet? Of course not. It's us who want our kids to go in the toilet, and many other things. And that's fine. We certainly don't have to apologize for that. But what we do need to realize is that since we are the ones who want these things for our children, it is our job to find a way to get them as interested as we are. Second, as Pedro's mother was endeavoring to toilet train him for the first 6 months before seeing us, she was doing what almost all parents and teachers do. She was pushing Pedro to use the toilet even when he didn't want to. She was offering him rewards, which immediately sent the message that the toilet was something unpleasant that he had to do to get the reward. And she conveyed the message in countless subtle ways that there was a right way and a wrong way to go on the toilet. For instance, peeing and missing the toilet is the wrong way. Now Pedro's thinking, hey, I liked this better when I was getting my diaper changed. No one was pressuring me and I couldn't get it wrong. And really, I can't blame him. What Pedro's mom did so brilliantly with the motivation principle was use an interest Pedro already had. She didn't break trust by pushing him, and she made the toilet something that was fun and motivating to Pedro in its own right. Important. This case study illustrates an example of using the motivation principle for a basic skill. Please don't take this to mean that this principle is only useful for teaching these types of skills. In fact, this strategy is incredibly powerful with more complex skills, such as social and conversational skills. We will be discussing a case study on exactly this area in Chapter 15. Activity time! On a piece of paper, make 2 columns. In the left-hand column, write down 5 motivations or areas of interest that your child has. Don't worry about the order. In the right-hand column, write down 5 specific short-term educational goals. These are things that you are trying to get your child to do or learn. Now, draw a line from one of the motivations to one of the goals. How will you decide which 2 items to connect with the line? Look over your table and think about which motivation might most easily go together in a game or activity with which goal. This does not mean the motivation and the goal have to be similar or naturally go together. Remember the example from this chapter when Pedro's mom combined a stepping stool with peeing in the toilet? Those 2 things aren't at all similar. Another mom worked on her son's eye contact using his interest in airplanes. A dad worked on his daughter's language using her interest in Disney characters. So you are just going to do your best. Once you've connected one motivation with one goal, draw a line connecting a second motivation with a second goal. Then continue drawing lines until each motivation has one goal connected to it. This will be your beginning blueprint for coming up with games and activities to help your child gain skills and achieve goals. You can use this blueprint to begin generating an idea or 2 of what kinds of games and activities you can do with your child to help him progress. Online resources. For more in-depth help with the principles and techniques of this chapter, please go to www.autismbreakthrough.com/chapter3. Starting point. Remember the 3-step technique we talked about earlier. 1. Join your child until she is no longer isming, and she looks at you more than just a 1-second glance. Note, you can skip this step only if your child is already interacting with you and not isming at all. 2. Playfully invite your child to participate in an activity or game based upon something that she likes, as we've discussed. 3. Beginner's version. If and only if your child willingly gets involved in your game, keep that game going as long as possible. For example, if she loves to be tickled or enjoys talking about the planets, simply participate in this activity with great enthusiasm for as long as your child stays interested. Just having your child engage in that game for increasing amounts of time will stretch your child's interactive attention span and thus her ability to interact with others. 3. Advanced option. If and only if your child willingly gets involved in your game, add one thing. For example, if your child loves chase games and you can successfully get her to play chase with you, then try adding one thing, such as you keep running out of gas and she has to keep saying chase to get you to chase her.